On this edition of Native Report, we go gardening in the Mdewakanton Wozupi.
This is temptation.
If I can finish this last marathon, I'll have.
We meet Sac and Fox Nation Secretary Dirk Whitebreast. And we visit Petroglyph National Monument in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We also learn something new about Indian country and hear from our elders on this Native Report.
Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and the Blandon Foundation.
Welcome to Native Report. I'm Stacey Thunder. Wozupi means garden in the Dakota language. And for the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, their garden is a demonstration of one of the many supportive and healthy ways the community is caring for the environment, Mother Earth, the people, and future generations. On this hot and humid summer day, workers in the Mdewakanton Wozupi tirelessly do their chores. The garden has nearly quadrupled in size since the inaugural growing season.
Mdewakanton Wozupi started in the spring of 2010, was our first year. And it grew out of, I think, multiple kinds of efforts that the tribe is already involved in. You know, the Shakopee Mdewakanton are doing many different things around land stewardship. And this was kind of a natural evolution of those activities. Also a result of wanting to provide our community members with clean foods, give them the opportunity to reconnect with the land, reconnect with their food source, and all of that hoping to result in better health for our community. I kind of look at it as kind of a ripple effect where our target is our community members. We were established for our community members to provide them with a good source of clean food. But then after that, we also consider our tribal employees as part of our community. So our produce goes to them also, goes to our market, and they can purchase there or they can become members of our TSA. And then after that, we have our wider community. You can see that we have neighbors all around us here on the Shakopee Reservation, so we share our bounty with them too. Our garden has grown quite a bit in the last year. In 2010, we grew, as I said, 1.5 acres, and we held 3 weekly produce sales on the reservation. This year we grew into a 5.5 acre spot. We hold a weekly produce sale at Mizopia, the natural food store.
The SMSC is operating a tribally supported agricultural program based upon the community-supported farming model that has been practiced in the United States for 20 years.
Our TSA, which stands for Tribal Supported Agriculture, is based on the CSA model, Community Supported Agriculture. And that is a concept where people invest into the garden at the beginning of the season. They purchase a share, and then once the garden is into production, they get a 3/4 bushel basket full of whatever is coming out of the garden. As an added benefit, in our TSA program, we have weekly cooking classes at Mizopia at the natural food store. So members come, they see what's in the box. We are what we eat. And when we're eating clean food, natural foods, I think it does several things for us. One, it brings us closer to our food, closer to the earth. So we make this reconnection with the earth, which I think is so important for Indian people. We don't grow with synthetic fertilizers, chemicals. There's no pesticides that are added here that are not organic. Being certified organic, we have to follow very stringent rules. We were doing that prior to being certified. That's how we became certified, because we grew in that way we documented that, and we always leave a portion of the garden that is in cover crop. It allows the soil to be replenished. You're not taxing the soil by taking everything out of it every year. You let those things rest and replenish the earth. We have a greenhouse that went up this spring. That allows us to start our seedlings, our plants early in the year. Allows us to do some things later into the season also.
How many varieties of vegetables are there?
We have well over 150 varieties of a multitude of different crops. So take the summer squash, for example. We probably have planted 6 or 8 different types of either hybrid seeds or heirloom seeds. Variety is good. Oh, and this is one of my favorites. This is patty pan down here, or flying saucer. And these are really fun to throw on the grill or put in stir fries. And they also look like a gourd, but again, they have very tender skin and tender flesh. So I think we should probably go visit the sweet corn, because sweet corn picked and eaten out in the field, warmed by the sun, is probably one of my favorite things. We have ground cherries that are just starting to come on. They're related to the tomatillo. Absolutely delicious. And I'm a sucker for the melon patch. This is Temptation. That's a 65-day sweet corn. Bicolor. And by golly, is it sweet! Best way to eat sweet corn. Yep.
Being in the garden is a really wonderful place for me. It brings me almost to a meditative state, especially when I'm weeding. I can really spend a lot of time just being right there with the plants, pulling things from the earth. I feel like it grounds me. It really brings me to a present moment and really makes me appreciate just what the earth and the water and these things provide to us. Many of the chronic diseases that we deal with as Native people, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, obesity, really can be addressed with a healthy diet.
Did you know petroglyphs are also called rock engravings? These images are created by removing parts of a rock by picking and carving. Petroglyphs should not be confused with pictographs, which are images that are painted or drawn on rock. Petroglyphs are found all over the world and are usually associated with prehistoric peoples. At the Petroglyph National Monument in New Mexico, there are over 24,000 carved images. Some of the images are clearly visible as animals or people, but others are more abstract carvings with deeper and more complex meanings, potentially recreating some event or some aspect of spirituality.
Next, we meet Dirk Whitebreast, whose personal story of dealing with crisis, how good things can come out of bad situations, is inspirational. On this morning, at the National Congress of American Indians annual gathering in Portland, Oregon, a poignant story with a powerful message is what draws an intimate group of people to one meeting room.
My name is Dirk Whitebreast. I'm the current Secretary Tribal Council member for the Shakopee of Iowa, the Squaxin Nation. I remember telling a friend a long time ago, and he had reminded me recently when I was running for Tribal Council, I remember that you wanted to do that. I remember you talking about that when you were younger. And I remember that conversation, and I looked back at that point in time, and I was 15 when I told him that. So about half my life I've been wanting to be on the Tribal Council. Yeah, I was just sharing with a young man that we as Tribal Council members would make a lot of tough decisions, and a lot of people like to do other things in order to, come up with a decision. Some people like to smoke cigarettes, some people drink alcohol, and I run. I use my running to make decisions. If I've got something weighing heavy on my mind, I put my shoes on and I go out and run a few miles, and that allows me to clear my mind and focus on what's important, and not just with decision making, but with life in general. Looking at the bigger picture and being able to remind yourself of why you're doing what you're doing and what you're meant to do on this earth. That's how I look at things.
Secretary Whitebreast began running as a way to cope with the death of his sister, a suicide. He speaks of that time with openness.
I was still living in Lawrence at the time. I was no longer in school. The girlfriend that I had at the time, we were still living a crazy, college life, and, drinking and doing things like that. And the night before, we had gone out with friends, and we ended up getting into an argument. We got into a small fight, and I ended up going back home, and I woke up alone, and I knew that something had gone on. So I woke up to my door knocking, and I knew it was her. So I had opened the door, and we had sat down, and I knew that we were about to hash things out. And right before we started talking, I ended up getting a phone call, and it was my aunt, and she was crying, and she was in hysterics, and so I knew something was wrong immediately. And so she had told me that that my sister had killed herself. It was just one of the most surreal, unbelievable things that I'd ever experienced, and that's why I chose to keep alcohol out of my life, and I've been able to do that for the last 8.5 years. But yeah, it was a really tough thing for my family. I know that everyone dealt with it in their own ways, and I know some of my family members are still dealing with it. I always think about the future that we were looking forward to with her. She had graduated a semester earlier than the rest of her class, and so she graduated in January, and she turned 18 in February, and she was gone in March. And I started running in the fall of that same year. As things progressed throughout my life, I always wanted to find ways to keep her memory alive and keep her spirit alive, because I think with all the things that I've been able to accomplish in these last 8.5 years since she's been gone, I know that I attribute all those strengths that I've learned, all those disciplines that I've learned to her. And I was always just wanting people to know how important she was to me, and hopefully I've accomplished that. I think there are a lot of different types of things that can be shared with my running in particular, in terms of young leadership, self-discipline, physical and mental health. I've gone through a lot of emotional health and a lot of emotional stress and a lot of emotional discipline through my running. I was talking to a friend, and she had introduced me to some others, and I had shared with them what I had just done. And the woman that I was talking to, she had gone and said, what you've just accomplished, those are one of the things where you realize that your body is just a holding place for your spirit. And I couldn't have said it any better. I mean, it was a really powerful thing, and I understood well what she was saying.
The Center for Native American Youth is also helping Whitebreast get his message heard.
I was recently invited in September to become a member of the Board of Advisors. I happily accepted that. I was really happy to share my story, but also know that by putting myself out there as a young leader, that I had a responsibility to others. Being able to engage with not only young people but adults with parents, and finding myself having a stronger voice than I even realized that I had, and learning how to use it and learning to accept responsibility for it as well. Being a tribal council member, people are always wanting a piece of your time, they're wanting your attention, and I've found that more than anything, they want to be heard. They want you to know that they're important. You know, they want you to know that that's who you're serving. And it's always, and there are difficulties because, you know, you can't always give your time the way you would like to, and some issues you can't help, but, you know, a lot of those things I've learned from my grandma is just to be as good a person as you can be, as long as you can be, and I try to maintain that daily.
I grew up on the river, born and raised on the Squally River, the mouth of the river, and that was our in the First World War, our Squally Reservation, 2/3 of it was bought by the military, and for Army purposes, for training troops. And so they moved my dad from Muck Creek Village down to the mouth of the river, and replaced him, and then they took that land into restricted trust status like the reservation, but it was clean off in the reservation. It was 8 miles off the reservation. So now we're sitting on the mouth of the river, and that's where I was born and raised, and I started fishing, and Dad taught me how to fish and everything, and so that was kind of my life, and you know, and I fished all year round, and from a little kid, you know, growing up, and it's so important to all of us.
Thousands of images etched into volcanic rock can be found throughout Petroglyph National Monument. Minutes from downtown Albuquerque, these images are inseparable from the cultural landscape, the people who created them, and the people who still revere their significance.
A light breeze blew over the high desert landscape of Petroglyph National Monument as Lori Wiaki made her way toward a very special place.
It's recognized by many, many tribes from throughout the region, actually even including in Mexico and over towards Hawaii. A lot of indigenous communities, indigenous religious leaders have identified this area as a spiritual, sacred place of prayer, I guess. And I think it's important for folks to understand that all these different communities, religious leaders, utilize this area in a variety of ways. So it's not just one certain thing. Like, you'll see a lot of the petroglyph markings here, but not every tribe would utilize this area specifically to leave behind those petroglyphs. Of course, some do. Some record their visions, their prayers, their clans, their communities said that they need to leave here. On the top of the escarpment here, there's 5 different volcanoes, and when those volcanoes erupted, it left behind this 17-mile long escarpment, and the 17-mile kind of zigzags. It includes canyons and different areas, but the escarpment is where you'll find all these petroglyph markings.
The petroglyphs number in the tens of thousands along the 17 miles of the ancient lava flow.
One time we were showing one of the Hopi elders and kind of explaining, like, politically what was going on with this area, and he showed us this one petroglyph, and it was he says they call this one the lizard man. He says, but that's not a lizard man. He says it's a man that has big hands and he's got big feet. And he says, and he has the big hands because it shows how hard it is to really make a living out of this land, this arid, kind of fragile land, right? He said, and he's got big feet because it shows how hard it is to stay. And he says, but this is something, this is our home, this is where we're from, and we have learned, you know, and we're forgetting a lot of those lessons, and we need to remember, you know, what it is to know our own homelands the way we used to.
The land where the petroglyphs are located is not tribal land. At one time, jurisdiction was divided between Albuquerque, the state of New Mexico, and the National Park Service.
It was originally jointly managed, and so there was a piece owned by the state of New Mexico, a piece by the city of Albuquerque, and then the National Park Service. And so on one hand, we really advocated and fought that this area should have the strongest federal protections, because we felt like that was the most stable protection and offered the most protection for this area. However, that's not quite politically how things worked out, and as a result, you're still continuing to see an immense amount of growth, pushing on the boundaries of this area. And we were lucky to have one of the elders from one of the pueblos really talk to us about the spiritual integrity of this area. And at the time, he was very concerned about they wanted to build 2 major freeways through this area. And so as young organizers, young Native folks, we were real kind of staunch about the fact that they should not desecrate a sacred site, because that there were alternatives to go around this area.
Urban encroachment was reason enough to lobby for national monument status for the site.
My brother reminds me that it wasn't easy to come out here and leave your prayers and to make these markings. You know, 800 years ago, you were pretty much on foot. You know, you really had to make a long journey to get here, whether if you're from Zuni Pueblo or one of the surrounding pueblos. You couldn't just pick up and be here in 45 minutes or something. And the hard part is, of course, with the urban encroachment, a lot of the tribes have quietly started to not be able to use this place as they have in the past, because it's just part of how it is right now. But you have joggers, you have airplanes, you have schools, all this kinds of stuff. And on one hand, early on in the efforts to protect this area, the tribal leaders, the 19 pueblos, the Navajo Nation, they did discuss the fact that this area was located within the boundaries of the city of Albuquerque. And through their discussions, they decided it was important to protect this area. There was some really good folks that were really concerned, preservationists, conservation type folks, environmental groups, the Park Service, the tribes. They really got together and said, yes, let's go ahead and create this Petroglyph National Monument.
There is still an enormous amount of growth. Albuquerque is one of the fastest growing cities in the country, making the protection of this resource vitally important.
It's very precious if you really start to look at this site and understand that there's not this sort of collection, every 5 miles, every 10 miles, and that a lot of these petroglyphs have relationships, a lot of these sites have relationships with other sites, whether that's 20 miles away or 100 miles away, or even we've heard they have relationships to some of the petroglyph collection areas down in Mexico. And on one hand, we're just little people, we're human beings. The areas will take care of themselves, but in the meantime, it almost is like a mirror of what you're doing to yourself. So the more you desecrate these precious areas, you're desecrating yourself, your own generations, and it's like water. If you don't take care of it, if you desecrate the water, it becomes unhealthy and undrinkable, and yet that's what we need to sustain ourselves. It really goes back to what those elders told us, to recognize the spiritual integrity of this area and to know that this area like all these sacred places, they know each other, they connect with one another, and they all have different powers. And so I would just ask that all the young people not to forget, and that if you do come into these areas, you have to recognize that as beautiful as some of these places are, come in a way that you're as if you're going to a respected elder or a respected mentor, or someplace like that.
For more information about Native Report or the stories we've covered, look for us on the web at nativereport.org and on Facebook. Thank you for spending this time with your friends and neighbors on Native Report. I'm Stacey Thunder. See you next time.
Stacey Thunder is a member of and legal counsel for the Red Lake Nation, and Tad Johnson is a member of the Boys Fort Band of Chippewa and is chair for the American Indian Studies Department on the campus of the University of Minnesota Duluth. Production of Native Report is made possible by grants from the Shakopee Mdewakanton Sioux community, the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and the Blandin Foundation.